I had the pleasure of seeing this presentation in Nashville. And if you are a parent and you have teenagers or young children, this probably will be very eye-opening for you, as it was for me. Uh, our first presenter is Cara Tuttle. She is the director of Vanderbilt University Project Safe Center for Sexual Misconduct Prevention and Response. And she is going to talk about Generation Z implications for prevention.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so much better. Okay, good. It's unmuted, but that's very important. So good morning again. I am Cara. I'm the director of the Project Safe Center at Vanderbilt University. So I do regularly work with the college age population. And we're always trying to keep track of how the new crop of students changes from year to year. And we noticed a few years ago that we had been making many assumptions about Generation Z, carrying over some of the tendencies and characteristics of millennials when actually they're very different. And this has pretty significant implications for prevention. And so, first of all, I want to look and compare and contrast the generations so that we have an understanding of how and why they're different. So who is Generation Z? Media also calls them iGen sometimes because of the heavy device use. Typically, and you know the generations are always a little blurry, but we are thinking that they are born between 1996 and 2012. Importantly, they are digital natives. So unlike me, a Generation Xer, and unlike many of us who learned to use all of the modern technology, this is the only world they've ever known. And so they're used to having a device widely available, and actually the availability really is ubiquitous. I mean, it cuts across race and ethnicity and class. Not that everyone has the most recent device in hand, but usually on a daily basis, they have access to some device that either has enough cell service or Wi-Fi to get them and keep them connected. And for many of them, it's considered an extension of self. I know because I have to use my device on a daily basis for work that I would love, sometimes I fantasize about throwing my phone off a bridge, right? So I don't want it to be an extension of self. I don't feel like I have to have it at all times to feel connected and to know who I am. But Generation Z tells us that they do, that they have never actually had the opportunity to define a self that isn't connected to their technological connectivity. And so we have to perhaps stop scoffing at that and try to understand it better. And some of you who are parents who maybe take the devices away from the kids from time to time can understand how distraught they sometimes feel. So here is an overview of the range of generations currently comprising members of our population. And you'll see that there are some key events that were intervening events for them that shaped and defined them. And so these were pivotal in the formation and understanding of our national identity and figuring out who we are as we react to these things. You can see that Gen Z has had a tough time. So they have only known 24-hour news, constant sensationalism coming at you, images of violence, and they've grown up in a culture of a lot of fear. And a lot of that fear is valid. And that's just always background noise for them. But it is shaping them in ways that we really need to be thoughtful about. I try to reach as many visual learners as possible. So we have many different visual aids to work through here at the beginning. But also sometimes we are assuming that our population makeup is different than it is. So please see at left just how many members of Gen Z we have. they're a huge chunk. It's crucially important that we understand them. There's actually more of them than there are millennials. And so understanding the differences between these two groups is really key if we're trying to persuade people, which so many of us are, right? We want to help people, we want to reach people, we want to raise awareness, we want to change behavior so that people can live healthier, safer lives. And this is the lawyer in me coming out now. I'm always thinking, how can we frame our message to have the most impact? And we have to understand who it is that we're trying to reach. Now, this image at right is for my millennials, because many of them feel very strongly that they have not had fair treatment by anyone who's not a millennial, and certainly the media. It became like a derogatory term. Some of them feel very strongly about not being called millennials. And I've noticed in the team that I supervise that they firmly believe there's a difference in the older millennial and the younger millennial. And this makes sense. The older millennial has those 80s references. They know what Top Gun is. They know what an Ewok is, for example. They watched some movies on VHS or 2 years after, it came out in theaters. So less of the, I have to have it on demand. They remember the dial-up sound and how long it used to take for us to get connected, and that we sat there with that terrible service and thought it was worth it. And we played video games that, basically were your cursor and little white lines. And we thought that was amazing at the time. And so where you have younger millennials blending into the older Gen Z is because they have fully embraced the modern technology, and it got better quite rapidly. So they are used to more immediate connections, which cultivates that want of instant gratification, and just many tools at their disposal. And so we kind of got to learn one at a time. They are just bombarded with opportunities and apps and ways. And, as a parent, it's hard to keep up. And as a student affairs professional, it's hard to keep up with all of the different tools that they're using. And so we can have a growing gap if we don't do the education to understand this particular population. Now let's zoom in a little bit and compare and contrast millennials, because here's where we've probably lost some time in assuming that they were the same or just more extreme versions of millennials. Where millennials got to experience an economic boom, and even if that was not experienced within their family unit, you get the feelings and the advertising and the community impacts of an economic boom that shape your outlook. Whereas Generation Z grew up in a recession. You see the range of ages there. So millennials were mostly parented by baby boomers, whereas Generation Z is parented by the kind of angsty, cynical Generation Xers. Millennials tend to be idealistic. They really like to have experiences. They were mobile pioneers, as I mentioned. So they were like, yeah, let's try this and let's improve it. And early adopters of Facebook, for example. But now for Gen Z, if you too feel like you can't keep up with all of the new apps that roll out on a daily basis, or you are choosing just not to adopt new apps anymore because it's just gets overwhelming, right? Then you are very different from Gen Z, who find that quick use and disposability of certain forms of technology to just be business as usual. This is a little bit tricky to understand because there is overlap, but millennials wanted brands that shared their values, where Gen Z is really valuing authenticity. And we hear the word authentic or authentically and authenticity all the time when talking to this population. It's really latched on. And so it's like, how do we engage authentically? How do we be a student organization that is sincere about who we are and what we're about? And I didn't have that before. I'm really encouraged by that. That's actually a place where I have lots of optimism, is because student organizations don't want to do just the symbolic thing. Mostly in my day job, I focus on addressing sexual assault. And just a few years ago, it was very normal to have a fraternity, for example, who would do the thing like hang a banner outside the fraternity house during Sexual Assault Awareness Month. I'll take the banner, okay? But now they're coming to me instead of me giving this talk to them, saying we don't want to just hang the banner. We need to make this real. We know we're failing at addressing this issue in our community. How can we engage more authentically? And so that in 2020 is something that I really am encouraged by. And it's happening even in this remote environment. So we're not having the typical college experience where I work. It's heavily reduced. We do have students on campus, but they are not living their normal, campus life. And they're still, despite all the challenges that 2020 has brought to us, trying to engage. And millennials do still use Facebook, although they do think it's a little bit dated. They love Instagram, even still. They'll try TikTok, okay? Some of them, the younger ones, will have embraced TikTok. Whereas Generation Z preferred Snapchat, although it's less popular now. This slide is like 2 years old. And Instagram, which they still love, but they're the ones also using TikTok and WhatsApp and Twitch and these other things that are video clips, are quick forms of communication. They like a little whimsy. They like, again, to put more of their authentic self in. With millennials, we had this veneer of perfection that we wanted to display at all times, and positivity, which was harmful for some of us because it's selling this version of idealism and perfectionism that really for the younger audience felt unattainable. So we had years on the college campus where we but we regularly spoke with students who are like, all of my friends are having an amazing time. I'm having a hard time. What's wrong with me? And we would try to convince them that it's not just them, that this is a universal experience. And we were really worried about social media and the ways in which people were cultivating this picture perfect life and struggling privately. One more compare and contrast for you. I like this one because I find the first bar there very interesting. So millennials were consuming young adult novels and anime and TV clips and YouTube clips in the realm of fantasy, and where we have a shift with Gen Z is into dystopian. Now, how foretelling is this, right? That really was something I didn't quite understand. And yet here we are where it looks more likely on a daily basis. And they consume images. And so millennials will still text and they'll still message within apps, and they do like the images, right? Instagram remains very, very popular. So they're communicating in both ways, while Gen Z can feel satisfied in their connections amongst their peers through TikTok, which isn't so much talking. I mean, it's a lot of dance clips, it's a lot of comedy. There are some how-to videos in that, but it's a different way of communicating that one would imagine lands differently for them. They are more realistic. Again, I think, the weight of the lifespan, the events over their lifespan is coming in there, and they kind of feel old for their years. They have a displayed maturity, concern and worry, and it's less of life as an adventure than compared to millennials. Pause one moment. Now, excuse me, there is overlap, right? There would be. There's overlap at every generational shift. And so here is just one more way to understand who your millennials are. They're often in the workplace. They could be, your assistants, your associate directors, mid-level managers by now, partners in law firms. So millennials are often older than people think of them. Because you could be born in 1980. I have many millennials that are on my team at Project Safe and a few Gen Z members. And I can tell you they engage in the work and in the workplace and with their supervisor differently in ways that make sense when you look at charts like this and the data on Gen Z. Now, there is some skepticism, and that can be very healthy, corporate skepticism. It really makes sense to me because we hear in the news quite regularly of companies and aspects of capitalism where people are saying one thing and doing another. In the news, it just came out of maybe last week, and my students were talking about this, about the plastics lobby putting the recycling symbol on lots of products that aren't actually recyclable. That hits home for them. Like, that feels like such hypocrisy. And they have a lot of distrust. And if you think about what's been coming at them in the past, 10, 20, 30 years, it makes sense for both populations. But Gen Z is actually shifting towards a desire for more personal connection and stronger personal connection. And we don't say that about them, and we don't think that about them, but they are telling us they want it. And certainly, since COVID has disrupted their lives and their patterns and the ways in which they are doing school, for example, we're hearing this very often across. At Vanderbilt, we have the Student Care Network. And so we have different offices with case managers, our counseling center, our Center for Student Wellbeing. We're very lucky to have resources to do that, but every office is coming together and saying, this is a really tough time, and they're struggling with feelings of loneliness and isolation, which puts them at risk for so many considerations, such as drug use, increased alcohol use, self-harm, different forms of sexual misconduct. They're really utilizing our services. We're in quite demand that isn't surprising when you consider all the things that 2020 has brought, and that we're in a pandemic. So here is a slide that the last time I gave this talk really jumped out at people. And please know this is a pre-COVID data set right here. So I'd imagine the numbers are just higher, and perhaps exponentially so. Gen Z was thought to watch 68 videos in a day. I don't know about you. I think I watch maybe 2 to 3 videos in a day, or I did pre-COVID. Someone will send me a cute video, usually animals. That's a nice spot in my day, but I'm not sitting consuming cat video after cat video after cat video, pre-COVID. 2020 though, many of us are like, send us all the cat videos there are, I'll take anything, pandas, dogs, which I understand. We're coping in different ways. They used to send many Snapchat videos back and forth. Snapchat is a little less popular than it was. So, I think we would sub TikTok in on here. TikTok is creating new stars in a new way, differently from even Instagram. So if you have an understanding of how Instagram changed celebrity culture or changed business, please know there are TikTok stars now that can have 1 million views of something overnight. So it's even faster. With an even broader fan base, and goes viral in a different way. And our young people are consuming that content really nonstop. It used to be 6 to 8 hours a day. Pandemic behaviors are telling us they're online many more hours than that. And for parents, who are struggling in this new environment without sufficient support, if they're trying to work and homeschool all of a sudden, can be very tempted, and this is very understanding, to just let the children, if just for a while, spend more time on a device, right? If they are quiet and entertained. But there are harms that come with this massive consumption of social media, because we know it's also connected to feelings of anxiety and depression and isolation sometimes, even though they're using it purportedly to connect. They love YouTube, and where this has implications for prevention is that many organizations that work in sexual violence, for example, are heavy users of Facebook. Generation Z has a Facebook, but they tell me it's kind of like the phone book. It's kind of like the yellow pages. Everybody feels like they have to have it, but it's not something that you are necessarily flipping through on a daily basis. So they think of it really as a way to remember birthdays and have contacts in their phone. So if you're trying to get through to people with using primarily Facebook, you may need to adjust. And so you have to think about, do I need to have a TikTok? Well, that depends. You know, I don't have TikTok, but I do have younger people on my team, and that may be something that we explore if that's where they are. And so I want to challenge you a little bit to get out of your comfort zone. We still use Facebook in my office. I put lots of event listings. I'm currently sharing lots of our Zoom links on Facebook, but we are not using it to engage in dialogue at all. And many people liked to use it that way. Now, if your target demographic is Gen Xers, by all means, keep using Facebook. If it's older millennials, they're probably still on there a little bit less during the day than Gen X tends to be. But if we're trying to reach people, particularly in a remote or virtual online environment, we might need to embrace new technologies to reach them where they are. And Gen Z is just not engaging with us on the same platforms that we might like and find easy to use. They view the world differently. There are many points of optimism in this. And they do look different. So if you think the world looks different now, it does. And they find this to be positive, right? And so this is a generation that just doesn't say we should care about diversity. They embrace it. They expect it. And this is, you know, who they are. This is what their peers look like. So, you know, our racial and ethnic composition has changed considerably. And while many areas in the nation do remain quite segregated, sometimes when they're coming together at school, they're able to meet people who don't look like them, who don't think like them, who don't come from a family like them, even if they then go home to different neighborhoods. They have, over the past 4 years, been the strongest in their dislike and distrust of the current administration. But I use this here not to be overtly political, but to say we have quite a divide as the generations age further and further apart. And think about who is running your program, who is choosing your marketing and your messaging. What do your images look like? What do the side comments that people make when you're presenting, what do those sound like? Because you could be alienating your audience if you don't feel strongly about issues of social justice, because Gen Z absolutely does. Here's some more optimism. They're much better than anyone older than them at distinguishing fake news. So one of the byproducts of consuming so much of this on a regular basis is that they can see the nuances better than people who didn't grow up learning in schools on computers. I mean, I even learned to type on a typewriter. It's a rural school, so we were a little slower to the adoption of those big box computers. And some of the older millennials may have too. You know, we just have quite, you know, an amount of disparity and inequity across school systems in the United States. And so if we came later to computer use, and if you get the news by your TV, if you watch local news in the evening, you are wildly different than most of Gen Z. So they are almost universally just skimming headlines and clicking on things of interest to them. That's a different way of learning and informing yourself on current events. But what's good is that they are better at detecting spam and false information and really leading headlines. They also have a much stronger understanding of the app. And for us, for those of us who work and are really concerned about dating and domestic violence, sexual misconduct, and stalking, sexual exploitation, which is primarily, it's not only, but most of what I see is the use or misuse of photos and videos. So it's something they're at very high risk of. And they feel, as do I, that the problem is not the taking of the picture. And we kind of have to get over that. You just do. If you expect them not to engage romantically and sexually using the device that they think is an extension of self, you're out of touch. And I'm sorry, you know, like I don't normally want to be direct, but I just see the harms of things that sometimes parents and family members say to young adults about the use of photos and videos, especially in an isolating remote environment, in a pandemic where we're quarantining, and also for the college students quite regularly when they have long distance relationships. So it is unrealistic of us to not expect that they are engaging somehow using apps. Now they trust some apps because stuff like Snapchat, you know, those videos are supposed to disappear. Now, I'll tell you, there's always a way around it. So I have problems there, even when the things say they're supposed to disappear. But the good news is that Gen Z knows about their privacy settings. Now, they don't always choose the ones that I wish they would, okay? It seems like we have a lot of location sharing all the time that they are just very comfortable with, that is concerning to me sometimes. And concerning to me because they often don't recognize something like stalking until it's very severe, but they do better understand their privacy settings. So when they want to shield themselves or block themselves from some bullying and harassment and harm, they know how to do that. This is a pre-COVID chart. We'll look at the pandemic data here in a minute, but they already overwhelmingly were the most stressed out of the generations. They were very concerned by many topics. It's heartbreaking to see that they are so concerned on a daily basis about a mass shooting. And when you break that down, that is fear of a school shooting. And that's the reality that they've known. That has been a problem over their entire lifespan. But they are aware and they are concerned about things that would be, you know, national news. They are much more likely to know a peer who has at least attempted, if not completed, suicide. Suicidal ideation is very high in this generation and significant and frequent. And we see it all of the time in the 16 to 24-year-olds that we're often engaging with on the college campus. We have some pre-college programs. Thankfully, I do not have many 15 and 16-year-olds in college, but there's a few, you know, and it's very concerning to try to put them in what is for us a very high pressure environment when we know they're already facing these tensions and fears. They are impacted by the widespread reports of sexual harassment and assault. This is perhaps the most activist generation on that issue, and I find a lot of optimism and encouragement in that. But I have devoted myself to working on the issue where they are just trying to be teenagers and young adults, right? So it's a really different perspective, and that's a heavy thing to carry around. And so they were going in to early 2020 already feeling these concerns and many other concerns as well, not reflected here. And so what effect has the pandemic had? Well, it's had a negative impact on all of us. Okay, so the somewhat worsened, you see, you know, high numbers across the generations. And Generation X, I mean, we're actually the highest on this chart here, but you can see that like it's significantly worsened. And crisis hotlines, counseling hotlines, text chat features, everything I know about that is tailored to Gen Z and to that, for me, a 16 to 24-year-old range is the target demographic, is heavily burdened right now and has increased use. And so what happens, right? What are the risks when this is the daily environment that they're navigating? They also have a different relationship to drug use, which you, I'm sure, have talked about or talked about at length. You know, so this may not be as surprising for this audience in particular, but they are very comfortable with widespread use of marijuana and CBD products. This is not such a barrier for them to trying things. The US is quickly embracing, particularly CBD. States have begun legalizing medical use of marijuana. We see this trickling in from the coast is what I'm always thinking. And so you may differ, right, in your comfort or your approach to casual drug use, marijuana or other drugs. I know we encounter this We have students who come to our campus from states where marijuana is legal in some respect, and they really don't understand. I mean, the conversations we have to have with them in student conduct or in offices that can conduct drug screenings are very different, and they changed quite quickly. So it wasn't just they know it's not legal, they know they shouldn't do it. They're very argumentative that like, no, it is legal and I rely upon this and it's prescribed for my anxiety. And then we're having to say to them, I understand that. And actually many of the staff have a wide range of feelings on this, so they can relate to the use of it and believing in it sometimes as an appropriate method to alleviating a variety of conditions. But if it doesn't remain legal in our state or on our college campus, and we have federal laws governing drugs on the college campus, we're having a divide here. And these are challenging conversations when we're trying to get buy-in to abide by our policies, right? And we had to change the dialogue and the persuasive nature of our programs around this, knowing that Generation Z had shifted. Okay. Where is there room, right? There are concerns that certainly are linked to use of opioids, but there are opportunities too in this shift. Now we know that they say they want personal connection, but the way their lives are structured, they were pre-COVID having about 7 hours per week of less social human-to-human interaction. They actually spend many more hours with their parents than previous generations. They're very comfortable having their parents drive them to things. They're used to mixed environments of parents and kids in places together. We actually often think that every generation gets more sexual early on, and Generation Z is not that generation. And some of you are doubting me on the other side of the screen right now. Like this is really entrenched that we believe they're hypersexual. Media is definitely hypersexual, very sexual at an early age. You have shows where, the cast is really supposed to be in high school, but they are engaging in some of the most adult and sometimes horrific behaviors. And we worry that that risk is always present in their environment. And the risk is there. I'm not saying they don't have some peers who are engaging, but they tell us themselves right when they're coming to college. And that's where I get a lot of data, right? So as they graduate high school and are going into the workforce or into a community college or college setting, we have the opportunity to survey that population more than many others and build a really robust survey with a diverse sample. So that is a data-rich age for them. They are telling us that they have had no, or certainly less physical sexual activity. That does not mean that they don't consider themselves a sexual being and that they haven't sent sexts to each other, including pictures and videos. So some of us who are older are horrified that they might be sending naked pictures and videos. But to them, that feels less serious than the in-person sexual activity. And that might be really tough to wrap your head around. And it's not the focus of today's talk, but I could definitely talk to you for an hour on that alone. And I want to tell you, you all know me now. I work at Vanderbilt University. You can find me. I am happy to talk with you about why I want us to change our narrative around sexual pictures and videos. And I mean this sincerely. Please feel free to contact me. We can have a phone call. We can have a Zoom, because when this goes poorly, this is so harmful to the student. And that often is linked to the risk of suicide at the top of this slide. If they feel such shame over this and the picture's already gone and out there, and you are communicating to them that this is some irredeemable harm, they have nowhere left to go. And the idea that once you send the picture, there's nothing to do is actually wrong, This is a huge pet peeve of mine. In my job, which is never boring, I have emailed Pornhub, and Bumble, and I will contact anyone to try to provide the best care, you know, for the person who's been harmed or targeted, the survivor in my midst. And we're actually very effective at getting things taken down off the internet. Not always. Sometimes it goes into a spiral into Reddit and subreddit. You know, I don't want to say there aren't risks. I'm not trying to minimize the risks, but the idea that there's nothing you can do is really a myth, and can be false information that pushes the person into despair. There are laws against certain electronic transfers and communications. You know, if the student attends a school, there are laws that would apply to these situations. Any school, different schools have different policies which go further, but we view that as an issue of consent, and we're teaching that as an issue of consent. And many times, if you're Generation X or older, you're not thinking of this the same way as your student at all, as your young person at all. They're less likely to date. I can tell you they don't call it dating, no matter what it is, okay? They don't call it dating. They tell us on a daily basis that they're talking. Talking covers the entire range of behavior. So sometimes talking is talking and it has no sexual component, but sometimes talking is sex and they just are calling it, you know, talking all of the time. So please know that dating is something they think you would do right before marriage. And so like dating or exclusive dating, even though they're doing it, some of them are doing it. And many of them tell us actually in very private surveys that that's what they want. For some reason, the terminology is just getting far afield where they're like, no, I have to figure myself out first. And there are a lot of pros to that, right? That this focus on individualism. I have to figure myself out. Therefore, they articulate, and many of them are comfortable with casual or undefined relationships. But our messaging can be, if we haven't course corrected here for the shifts to millennials and the shifts to Gen Z, creating distance for us that we just don't need when we're trying to reach this population. Please see point 6 here, just for emphasis, again, because I believe some of you are doubting me. Lots of the data, not just one survey, but survey after survey tells us that many of them have not had sex, and more of them have not had sex by age 24 than in the 60s. And again, I don't want to convince you that they are children necessarily, or like millennials extending adolescence into adulthood. They have fears and concerns. They have increasing pressure and availability to engage via technology. For me, it means though that, wow, I get a lot of completely unprepared young adults in a college setting, living away from home and amongst one another, that can really feel dangerous and risky. And we see effects with alcohol and drug use. We see the effects with sexual assault. We see anxiety, depression, isolation, and risk of suicidal ideation or completion. They are also less religious. There's just a few things that I haven't talked about here that we could cover. They have a lot of income insecurity that can trend towards an increased prioritization of saving, which definitely we did not see along the millennials and some Generation Xers struggle with. They value inclusiveness, and they're less likely to identify with one of our primary political parties. Here's a quote, but actually we see similar quotes in study after study, that they like their phones, they're connected to their phones. The phone can be a security blanket more than they like people. Interacting with people requires vulnerability that they haven't built up strength in. They're also less likely to consume alcohol during the high school years. Again, we see overall they're less likely to consume. That doesn't mean we don't have pockets of binge drinking in high risk populations. Definitely, you know, with the older college age population, whether or not they're in college, but the post high school population, binge drinking and the large quantity consumption, that's strongly linked to that risk of sexual assault. So it's not just any consumption. It's the isolated nights of heavy drinking that can have really long-term harmful effects. We see this, you know, very much with Generation Z. Now, if they're on the college campus, many college campuses have policies that inadvertently encourage pre-gaming, right? Or the let's do shots before we go somewhere else, or let's do shots in our dorm rooms before we walk across campus and go to where the party is. So we have, heightened consumption, a bit of a break, and then you can have punch bowls where it's not sure, you don't know how much alcohol's in the liquid that you're drinking, drinking games. And so this can really just increase risk for a lot of harms, even just from falling down and twisting your ankle when they're consuming in that pattern versus like having a glass of wine or two over the course of dinner. This is shocking to me. Many of them are just choosing not to get their driver's license, or they're in no rush to get their driver's license. I don't understand this at all. I was so excited to have my driver's license. I still love driving and having a car. It feels like air. It feels like liberation to me. And they're just not in a hurry about this. And if they've had, parents driving them lots of places, or they have in cities, access to public transportation, they're really comfortable with that. That is also true across different communities. You would think it would not hold true in really rural areas where they didn't have other ways to get there, or it wouldn't hold across race and ethnicity, but that actually does. So that is an area where things have gone down. Now, it may feel like you're not seeing that, but please know that's the national data. Where we don't have robust, comprehensive, medically accurate sex ed, where there is fear of talking to adolescents about sexual activity and their bodies and how things work and how contraception could work, they are consuming pornography to fill those gaps. And they are learning harmful things from pornography. It's not that there isn't egalitarian pornography where they use condoms and things like that out there. That's available, but that's not what they talk about. That's not where they get free clips. And they're very short clips because you have to pay for the longer content. So they're consuming pretty violent 30-second to 2-minute clips of pornography to fill the gaps of sex education. And yes, for me, I am very concerned about that. And I see it. I see it in the incidents that get reported from 16 to 24-year-old college students, where it seems like, and it's more men, I get more reports about men engaging in violent behaviors and telling us actually that they saw it online, that they think people like that because they saw it online. This is very concerning. And at the same time, I have an increase, and this is good because we've reduced stigma, in people coming forward to tell us about what has happened to them or what is happening. They don't always want to participate in investigations, and that's fine. From the victim advocacy world, we do not pressure that. We try to meet people where they are and help them do what they're ready to do and prioritize safety over any of the other choices people might make. And so I have a lot of traffic to my center, but we don't have a corresponding number of investigations. And that's not because the school won't investigate. Some schools have handled things poorly, and I believe that, and I advocate against it. But I also have, hundreds of students who don't want to talk to an investigator, but do come forward to seek support. And that's progress, and we'll take it. But where you learn about sexual violence in the history, there's a risk for so many other behaviors, for coping mechanisms. And sometimes these issues are considered separate. So this is why I was really excited to talk to you today, right? I don't do the bulk of my public speaking with people who are working on opioid use, but in your screenings, you should really consider where there's been sexual trauma over the lifespan. Because if there's any, whether recent or childhood, whether we have, 2 weeks or 2 years of distance between the harm, we have a connection. We have a framework which is getting in our way of supporting survivors of sexual trauma. Many people and many women who've experienced it, many women who've experienced sexual assault in their lifetime, kind of take a tough love approach to today's survivor, telling them that this is the way the world is. You just have to endure sexual harassment in the workplace, and you just need to toughen up. right? That because we've survived for centuries, that you too can survive. But all of the things that we just talked about Gen Z, is telling us why that message does not feel like care, that is not necessarily helping them cope. So you can still hold that perspective. Life is hard. Sexual harassment and violence is common. So, yes, many of us do have to survive it and experience it and do tough it out, right? Because we don't have procedures that are handling this adequately. But can we soften the message and also wrap it up, in other strategies? Even when we think about free speech, and again, I'm coming at you from the college campus, so we think you can have this dialogue on a college campus, that you're supposed to bring these speakers and engage in tough debate. Gen Z disagrees almost universally, that they feel like they want to prepare for their career, yes, and they want to engage in dialogue, but it should be respectful first and foremost. And so you hear probably derogatory conversations about safe spaces on campus, or trigger warnings or content warnings, and some of you may be rolling your eyes. It does not mean we don't engage in the material. I teach a class on gender-based violence, and we engage in tough material every day. It just means that we are telling them before we launch into a graphic conversation of sexual assault, so that they can come in feeling prepared and bolstered and engaged in some of those self-care tools and coping mechanisms we're trying to teach them. So it means that they can engage in some grounding, or they can say, today is not the day I feel ready to do that, so that they don't force themselves to engage in the material and then engage in harmful behaviors afterwards. It's not, I don't believe in the bubble children, right? And like navigating the world this way. I want them to be prepared, but we can take care of them while we are ushering through these phases. And so they're actually much better to each other. So peer support can be crucial. Peer support is often what they're seeking and what they value. Because they may be better at it, right? If you don't have training in working with sexual assault survivors, again, call me. I can give you some quick tips, or we can do more training later on.
Hey, Cara,
Yes.
are you ready to take some questions? We have quite a few.
Okay, yes, I'm ready to take some questions. I'll just leave the slide up here then. I don't want to read it to you anyway, but I wanted to highlight for you that there are strong research connections to opioid use. And I'll just pause there. So.
All right, here's the first question. What are your thoughts on the micro generation Zennials, 1977 to 83, analog childhood and digital adulthood?
Yes, right. So that is a struggle, and some of us have embraced it more openly than others. I'm technically Gen X, but I have a lot of like millennial qualities. I'm very social justice minded, and I'm not as cynical as Generation X is often portrayed, on TV and film. So yes, I do think that a lot of times we talk with the shorthand of acting like these generational lines are strictly drawn, and there's not, right? And we just have to, all the tools that we're bringing to so many issues can be useful to us or useful for people on those divides. I can go through phases where I feel addicted to my phone, right? And my work is not a helpful environment. It makes me feel like I have to have it at all times. And I can tell when I'm scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and getting that hit, right, of dopamine that is feeding, itself and self-perpetuating. And this is why, and my heart goes out to you, people with children in the pandemic. This is why you need to make them have breaks from their phone, right? It's like the evidence about the stressors on this generation are not linked to the economy. And we thought they were. We thought like, oh, Gen Z is shaped by economic crisis. It's shaped by phone use. And the evidence about device use really is not just phone, but phone and tablet worse than computer. Okay, so just know that, right? There's something about the phone and tablet that increases the risk in all of the behaviors talked about today. And Silicon Valley knows this. They know this. This is why you're getting more and more tools, right? Their career, their field, their profession, their product, actually, is what I'm trying to get at. Their product is going to be coming with warning labels. They are consulting with lawyers who used to work for big tobacco about how to warn us about the risks of phone use. So I'm trying to urge to you to take it very, very seriously. But yes, you need to make those considerations where there's the gender divide and any shifts, right, from analog to digital, because it can exacerbate the reactions that we have to that and the adaptability and flexibility around it.
Thank you. All attendees, I have put the link to the evaluation in the chat box. So use that link to get to your CEs and your certificates once you've filled out the evaluation. And the next question is, I worked at an inpatient mental health facility and knew an adolescent client that had sent nude pictures and received legal charges relating to child pornography.
Yeah.
How do we navigate the legality of this sexting behavior with the increasing view that it is normal or typical among Gen Z?
Yes, I mean, that's very concerning, right? And this is where the risk is very high. And if you want to be serious and scary in your messaging, it's where we have a minor involved. So yes, different states have different laws about it. And we had good intentions with the laws about minors, but this is wreaking havoc in the K through 12 school system. And so again, the risk is high. I don't mean there aren't risks with this, but I just mean when you are communicating with that population, understand that they view it differently. And the law is behind. You know, like this is an area where I'm lobbying legislators. It's like we had really good intentions and a really disastrous impact, right? And we corrected in many jurisdictions this about date rape, because we used to draw the hard line, and then we would have the 18-year-old boyfriend and the 17-year-old girlfriend, and that used to be statutory rape, even though they could just be months apart in age, right? So law likes to draw those hard lines. And then through time and evolution and lobbying and hopefully more inclusive representative lawmaking bodies, we get a full understanding. And this is something, I mean, this is a totally fair question, and this is where the law hasn't caught up. And so I'm not encouraging the use of photos and videos, particularly among minors, because asking them to consider, well, is it okay here or is it okay with this person? What we're focusing the messaging on is that the non-consensual taking, the non-consensual distribution, that's where the harm occurs, right? That's a violation of consent, but that's also where students, young people are finding themselves in trouble. Not that they shared it with their intended romantic partner, but that the recipient then posted it somewhere else when they go viral. That's where they are found out. That's where more and more parents get involved. Someone's outraged, and it's mostly dads. I got to tell you, most of my dads are the ones who really trust the legal system and want to use that as a response, but often with disastrous consequences, because I don't know anyone who wants to be known for their nude picture, and so we have to be prepared, and painfully so, to be supporting people on all sides of this, until we learn how to legislate around it better. So the risks are high. I'm not trying to make light of those.
Okay, so one more really quick question involving the opioid epidemic in this generation. So here, in Shelby County, the largest percentage of ER visits for overdose are ages 21 through 29. We are seeing a lot of fentanyl on the streets, fake pills. What, in your mind or your experience, is the best platform for us to reach kids this age to let them know what's going on out there and to let them know what to be wary of when they're out in the world, so to speak?
Yeah. So where you can incorporate young people who get it, who care, into your campaigns, the better, right? And there are not a lot of them. I mean, they have, it's very hard to bring people together. But when I walk into a room as the 43-year-old white lady director of the Project Safe Center, everybody already knows how I feel about the issue. I say yes and I go talk to everyone who will talk to me, but am I the most persuasive person to talk to our football players, for example? I'm probably not. So you want to be really intentional about who is your messenger, who is facilitating the workshop, where can we incorporate young voices? And if they tell you you've got to be on TikTok, then figure it out, you know, but try to feature them in the content, even if you write the script for them. Okay, I really try to do a lot of quality control and content control behind the scenes. And I worry in my field about peer advocates. I'm not trying to have peer victim advocates, although because of a lack of prioritization, many communities need that, right? We just are relying upon volunteers. And thankfully so, otherwise we wouldn't have had this whole field. So I'm a real fan of those of us most in the know, setting up conditions for them to be the carriers of the message to their peers because they value that. Of course, they think we are too old and out of date and too worried and that the risks are not that high. But if they have a peer saying, no, this happened to me, or this happened to my sister, and communicating that message to them in a way that feels really accessible and normal to them, that's shown overwhelmingly to be the most influential. So I would say get the young people in your efforts in any way possible and learn from them.
Yeah, young people in recovery are really a great asset. We've actually done a little bit of work with that, and it seems to be much more effective.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Cara, for being here, and thank you for taking the time to do this. It was great to see you again.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. I hope you found this entertaining or interesting, and I am very serious. Connect with me on LinkedIn or reach out via email. I'm happy to speak further about any of the topics that we covered today. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.